Mr. Money Mustache, getting in a few pull-ups during our break, practicing what he preaches. It's hilarious. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Compounding Podcast, where we talk to the very best at what they do, and we look for things that we can apply in our daily lives to compound everything that we do. And I could not be more excited to welcome today's guest. It's someone who has had a big impact on my life, which I'll talk about here in a minute. And it might just change your life too. It's Mr. Money Mustache himself, Pete Adeney. Hey, Pete.
Hey, thanks for coming to the headquarters.
I could not be more excited. I was not exaggerating. I'd like to start, if you don't mind, with a quick personal story, because as I said, you had a big impact on my life. So I guess it was about 7 years ago, probably. So, a little bit after you had started blogging, I was an executive at a big company. I was making a big fat 7-figure salary. I lived in a suburban McMansion. I had all the trappings of success we're told to strive for, but I wasn't very happy. And, I lived in a city I hated. I didn't have control over my schedule. I was trapped on what I call the hamster wheel, where it seemed like, no matter what I did, no amount of money was enough to feel satisfied. Retirement seemed like a distant goal, even for me. And then I stumbled upon the Mr. Money Mustache blog. And to be honest, it just blew my mind. And somehow, I'd worked in consumer finance. That's my career. I'd been in consumer finance for like 15 years and had never heard of the principles that you talked about. You describe, you have an engineering background. I'm an engineer. The way that you described them really, really connected with me. And what I realized in my case, I was in my like early to mid 40s. I was like, you know what? I already have enough to retire. Like I'm in a great situation. Why can't I just accept this? Or why didn't I know this? So it was a huge factor in some big decisions that my family made. I mean, we lived in Dallas at the time. We relocated the family to Colorado. I basically quit my job and gained, control over my life and my time, which is, of course, time is our most valuable asset, especially as we get older. We realize that. And then the last thing I'll say is, fast forward to today. So like 7 years later, had a huge impact on the way I think about money, had a huge impact on my life. But the principles that you sort of popularized are really the inspiration behind my work now. The company that I founded, Swell, is really based on many of the principles that you talk about. So I'll stop there and just say thank you. You had an enormous impact on me. That's why I was so excited to talk to you.
Yeah, it's kind of an amazing story. So thanks. It's always surprising to me because I'm just sitting at home, like typing some shit into the computer. And then these amazing stories come. I
bet you've had lots of stories like that over the years.
Yeah, but I'm glad to hear it from you. Did you say, do you have any idea where you came across? Because you know how the internet feeds you stuff and then you don't know how you found it. I always ask people.
Well, I want to say that someone said the words Mr. Money Mustache to me. And as you've learned over time, this is maybe by design, maybe by happy accident, that's like, it's a name that just sort of sticks with you.
Yeah, weird enough.
It's weird enough to stick with you.
Yeah.
And so I think I just, did the classic Google search and found your blog. And I will tell you, over the years, I've had dozens and dozens, if not hundreds of conversations with people where Mr. Money Mustache has come up. And that's like the story you hear over and over.
Whoa.
So took off organically, virally, which we'll talk about a little bit.
Yeah, but maybe this podcast will be that trigger for other people, which is, always good for me to spread around more.
Absolutely. I mean, and that's, for me personally, all of the work I do, these days, like, yes, it's nice to make money. It's nice to pay the bills, whatever. But at this point in my life, it's very much about personal mission. And, as the level of financial literacy in this country is absurdly low. And it doesn't have to be complicated. Like the great thing about a lot of the principles that you talk about and that are part of the FIRE movement is they're not that complicated. It just takes a little bit of discipline and knowledge.
Yeah. In fact, I try one of my little catchphrases is that I'm not trying to make anything super advanced. You just have to be slightly less ridiculous than average. And that's enough to get rich in the United States. But we're so ridiculous.
Yes.
And yet we think that's normal. That's the problem. We think it's normal.
Yeah.
So you back off even a little bit. And then you're like, whoa, like what a surplus.
And you say when we're ridiculous, you're talking about just the hamster wheel of life. Like,
yeah, I mean, like the idea that you can't have your house warmer than 72 degrees in the summer, right?
Yeah.
Slightly less ridiculous might be like 76, but that cuts your air conditioning in half, like just like that. So tiny changes that anybody should be able to handle.
Yeah.
But nobody does it because, our default is to just do what our friends do. And, like, oh, maybe walk somewhere that's a mile away instead of driving.
Right.
It's still ridiculous to drive 2 miles, but slightly less ridiculous is to walk a little bit.
It is. And I think that perspective, like when you hear some of the things you've said around like riding your bike or, buying a slightly less expensive coffee that tastes the same or whatever, of course that's true. But we get trapped in this idea and it really does come down to compounding. As you said, it's these little changes that really aren't sacrifices, but 1% here, 1% there, it adds up very quickly.
Yeah. And some of them are big percents, like if you do something relating to where you live, living close to work, that can be like a 50% or a doubling of your ability to save money. If you're like a middle income person, the richer you are, the smaller your car costs are a percentage. But for most people like middle class, like just making a little tweak in your driving habits is going to make the difference between like broke and then suddenly like you don't even know what to do with your extra money. That's
a message that has got to excite a lot of people.
Yeah.
So what I'd like to do, if you're okay with it, is I'm curious how you came to learn about some of these principles, because you didn't really invent a lot of this stuff. You really helped popularize it in a big way. So can you talk a little bit about your personal story? Like, I think it was 15-ish years ago now, you sort of stumbled into this stuff and you changed your life.
Yeah. Well, it was really, I was born like this. I was born like an engineer. I always wanted to optimize stuff. Like even as a little kid, I had these little things that I would try to make better. And it would be pretty repetitive to share this story, but maybe you haven't heard it. So when I was little, I started cutting the grass and washing my parents' cars, anything I could do to make money around the house before I got my first paper route. And that's when the real money rolled in. But I would like get the money and like paid $5 for cutting the huge grass or washing the car. And then I would just like clean up the $5 bill and iron it and stick it in a photo album. Because the little version of me was like, this is so awesome. Like, look how pretty the money is. And like, look how much I have. And it was just like a respect for earning and saving that was built into me as a little kid. And of course, like I didn't know about investing then. So like eventually I would rip, open the pages and then like take all these money and then blow it on something. Like at my time, it would be like stereo equipment or like I bought a dirt bike at one point when I was 16. So I still spent it all, but at least like the idea of like earning and saving was there. And then later I started realizing like, hey, if I don't spend it, then what can you do with that as an alternative? That was like as an adult. So, and then that worked out through the 2000s, like I left the year 1999 to 2005 was my hardworking engineering career. Right. 97 actually to 2005. And then at that 2005 point, I realized that we had enough to quit completely. So we retired from, at least I retired from my software engineering job.
Well, let me kind of summarize then. So you always had this sort of innate sensibility around money. And I remember one thing you wrote a while back that stuck in my mind was, because being an engineer as well is like this, like things that don't make sense are almost offensive to us. Yeah. Right. And so we have this very strong visceral reaction. But it sounds like you had that from an early age. And if I heard you correctly, basically you got a degree, worked as a software engineer for a total of 8 years. And because you had these practices in place, you were saving a lot, you were investing, and you reached a point where you were financially independent at what age?
Yeah, 30. Okay. Just before 31, but
ripe old age of 30.
Sounds better at 30.
Yeah, sounds better at 30. It's a good round number. And at what point did you become aware of, some of this you actually sort of did invent on your own independently. Then at some point you became aware of sort of the formal, rules that are associated with FIRE, which is financial independence, retire early, like the 4% rule.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I didn't read any of this or understand financial independence other than, coming to that conclusion myself, because I'm generally like for better or for worse, I don't really follow what society does. And I mean, I might see it and say like, oh, that's a good idea, or that's not a good idea. So I adopted some, rejected some other ideas. Like, why would I drive to work when I can ride my bike to work, which is better for me? Like that kind of stuff. Yep. Even if I'm the only one in the office doing it, I'm just doing it because I care about what I think. I don't care about what they think. So that's an advantage. And then after I started writing about it, like retired for 6 years, 6 years in, I'm like, why is everybody not retired? And then I started writing a blog about how to do it. And then that led to people saying like, hey, you're just like that book, Your Money or Your Life. I'm like, oh, interesting. So I went and got that book and I read it. And I said, yeah, that is kind of similar. And these people did it long before me, Vicky Robin and Joe Dominguez. Later, I got to meet Vicky Robin and go on some trips, with her when he co-hosted some stuff. And then I got to write the foreword for the next version when she rewrote her book.
Nice.
There's like this super weird, circle of like the existing literature and the new stuff that I write, and super cool.
I feel like maybe what you tapped into, because this is a question I wanted to ask you, is like, what caused Mr. Money Mustache to explode like it did? And one theory I might have, because it was my experience, is like, I was never the type of person who would go to the store and buy a personal finance book. One, because I'm extremely distrustful of anybody who would publish a book. And two, is it's just not something like I'm kind of an invent it myself person. What you did is you seem to be able to summarize and encapsulate into basically a blog post or a series of blog posts, these ideas in a way that made sense to people. So what do you think caused, like, you started writing 6 years after you retired, you put this blog out there, you didn't particularly do marketing around it or anything, you didn't have growth plans,
right?
But it took off like wildfire. So what do you think clicked?
Yeah, well, that was good. I mean, otherwise it would have probably fizzled after less than a year, right? Because
you'd still be retired. You just wouldn't be known as Mr. Money Mustache.
right. So, and I didn't really want to start the blog at the time. I'm like, oh, I'm plenty busy as a retired guy, just raising my boy and, being a family man and doing my construction hobby and stuff.
Yeah.
But it did take off. And I think it's just because, like, it's what you said. People want stuff that's easy to understand and easy to forward around to your friends. So I did write the articles like right when I started. I thought, because like I come from a marketing family. My dad was an ad man.
Oh, okay.
And everybody's writers in the family. So we enjoy writing. And so I thought, I'll just take the stuff that's in books that's pretty dry and try to make it more like actionable. And, to be really honest, I was motivated by this one book that I'd read long ago called The Magic of Thinking Big by Dr. David J. Schwartz. It's from 1959.
Tim Ferriss talks about that book all the time.
Yeah. I wonder if, I'm not even sure, we'd have to like do an internet like trace back, because like I wrote about it first in 2011. It was like one of my most important things I wanted to share with the early readers.
Yep.
And it's possible that maybe Tim Ferriss heard about it through a trail in that direction.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't claim that thing. But I do feel like it's possible just based on the timing of things. Because there's certain other books that have come out that I'm like, suspicious what they came from. So anyway, it's an amazing book. And it's written in this incredibly direct, manly, old-fashioned
like
way. Yeah, it's hokey. It's gentlemanly and like executive style for 1959. And nowadays it's very dated.
Yep.
But it really spoke to me, especially as a 16-year-old young guy. And I'm like, wow, this makes me feel like a powerful executive. And, and so I wrote my articles in that style.
Okay.
Not quite as old-fashioned, but it still has a lot more. Like, for example, you should always write to the audience, like saying you need to do that instead of like, one or like third, any kind of passive voice crap. You don't want to do that.
Right.
And also, thinking about novels and how an exciting novel is written, like it has to be action-packed, and you have to start with a story.
Yeah.
And all this stuff that's part of what real writers learn, and finance writers don't learn this. It's like a super advantage if you use author and novelist type techniques, but apply it to technical or financial writing.
That's amazing. It's an amazing insight. I have not read The Magic of Thinking Big. Now I'm going to for sure, but I have a sense of the style. And now that you talk about it, I remember like reading some of your blog posts, and you would say things like, but you being a, really savvy mustachian will do this.
Right.
And I could see where that directly comes from, that older sort of throwback style.
Yeah. Right. Be really informal. And it's fun to go back and forth between informal and using like, very street style language, but then surprise the readers by diving right into like, interest rate theory and Federal Reserve mechanisms and stuff. And then you go back to talking about like, you're attracted to a sexy person walking past you, and you'd like more of that. And like, just, to go on multiple levels, I think it makes people engaged and disarmed. But then you throw in the technical stuff, and then that will also, like, first of all, they'll learn from it because their mind's open to learning, but they'll also respect you more as an author. They're like, oh, this isn't just like a self-help guru, tanning salon selling bullshit to their audience guy. This is someone who really reads and understands money stuff.
Yep.
And he just also likes to express it.
Well, that was critical for me. I think that style is really uplifting and easy to read. But as you said, you always had the math in there. For me, I'm a math guy. I'm an engineer. The math was critical for me. It had to make sense for me personally.
Yeah.
Especially when it came to things like the 4% rule, which even today is sort of controversial. It gets debated at least. So why don't we pause for a second? Because I think most of our readers are probably have heard the term FIRE, financial independent, retire early. Maybe they've heard of you, but maybe they're not super familiar with the basic principles of, financial independence or the FIRE movement. So can you kind of summarize like some of the key things that someone needs to know to kind of understand this concept?
Yeah, I think the most motivating thing to teach someone who hasn't heard of it before is the idea of the 4% rule, which you can flip on its head and say the 25 times rule, which means if you know how much you spend per year, which is already, most people don't know, but let's say you can add up all your credit card stuff, figure out how much you spend per year, and that's your number. Let's say it's $100,000 just to be like a big number, easy to multiply.
Right.
You take that number and multiply it by 25, and that's how much you need in like boring, safe, lifelong investments to fund your $100,000 lifestyle forever. Never have to work again, approximately. Like you don't have to be exact because life is not precise anyway. So take your spending, multiply it by 25. Once you get that amount, you never have to work again. And you can work again if you want. Of course, you should.
Sure.
Everybody needs to stay busy.
That's right.
But it just doesn't have to be like the bullshit, like Zoom meetings at 6 a.m. or other kinds of things that you don't want to do. You do work that you do want to do. And any money that you make from it is optional and it's fun and you can be generous with that money. So anyway, let's take that $100,000 times 25. You'd need $2.5 million invested to fund that lifestyle, which to most people is a lot of money. But guess what? You don't have to spend $100,000 per year. That's actually preposterous. Just as an example, right now, I'm like a 47-year-old guy. I got my son living with me part-time, and I have a pretty nice lifestyle, a nice house. I spend about the low 20s of thousands per year. Yeah.
Because I remember you used to publish that every year, your annual spend.
Right.
And it was 25, 27,000.
Right.
You're still in that range.
For a family of three, right? And now, so now we got separate households, but we're still sharing the parenting. So like the cost should go up a little bit,
right? Which
they have per person.
Sure.
And like, I don't want to sound like all, excessive in my, but I can afford a lot more. I've saved a lot. I could spend many, many times more than that money. So I'm not doing it out of frugality. I'm doing it because that's what I feel is the most satisfying lifestyle I can create. And I don't like wasting. I don't like, having stuff that just goes to waste. And I feel bad about that. But anytime I want something, I'll buy it or I'll think about it and I'll buy it if I want to add it to my life. So that's 25,000. So I only need a quarter of that 2.5 million. So it's less than 1 million is enough to let me retire.
And that's a huge unlock because there's this notion in America that the standard retirement paradigm that the number is always millions of dollars, right? And it's hugely liberating to think that, well, no, it's actually under $1 million if you live a great life, but are just, fairly frugal, potentially well under $1 million.
Yeah, $1 million will give you a $40,000 lifestyle.
That's right.
And people will ask about tax. There's almost no tax at that level of lifestyle. The US has such a generous tax system that if you're like, let's say a couple or a small family with $40,000 of total income, especially it's coming from investments, that's usually less taxed. You're going to find that your tax bill is only like sometimes zero if you have children, sometimes like a couple $1,000s a year if you're, a couple, and a little bit more if you're single. So you get to keep most of it. And that really pays for a lot of stuff if you've kind of mastered this engineered way of, spending money only on things you enjoy. And then you nibble away the waste of spending on things you don't really benefit from.
And just as a side note for listeners, the 4% rule or the 25-to-1 multiplier is based on what they call a safe withdrawal rate, which says basically if you've got a nest egg, you can safely withdraw 4% for the rest of your life and really into eternity based on lots of historical analysis of the stock market and inflation and so on. And it's been debated, it's been tested, it's been studied, and it's pretty darn safe.
Yeah, it's pretty safe.
Yeah.
So, and just to give people an idea, if you were to think of it as a 5% rule, then it's a little bit risky. There's certain market conditions over your lifetime that might make it so you gradually run out of money. Of course, you're going to know 20 years in advance before this happens. It's not going to wake up and be like $0.
Yeah.
But you'd have to blindly say, nope, I'm going to keep withdrawing 5% every year. I don't care. And then eventually 20 years later, your balance might reach zero. 4% is a safe middle. If you go all the way down to 3%, which would mean you'd have to save 33 times your annual spending, that is so ridiculously safe that nothing
it's absurd.
Can happen. Yeah, like there would have to be a nuclear war or something like that to wreck the financial system so much that companies aren't able to return 3%.
Right. And the reason I usually frame it as a 25-1 because that's an easier way to think about the math. And what I think one of the insights that was interesting to me is that it's actually it's hard to save money. Like it's, to build a big nest egg, to save $1 million, but it's actually fairly easy and completely within your control to reduce your living expenses. And so, each $10,000 that you decrease your annual living expenses by, guess what? That's $250,000 less that you have to have in your nest egg.
Yeah.
And that's something that's very tangible and completely within our control.
Yeah.
So the math is powerful. And I always say, everybody should know their number, right? So just do the math, create a budget, know your number, track your net worth, because that just starting to do that in itself becomes a bit self-fulfilling. It's motivating because you start to see that the goal is achievable. Yeah,
that's a really good point. Saving is normally like pulling teeth for the typical person. They're like, ooh, how low can I make my retirement contribution so I can have a fun life? Because I'm never going to see that money. They think of it as a future you that doesn't exist. But yeah, if you think about the freedom that you're getting and you think every decision you make that results in spending less money pulls your freedom dramatically closer, that makes people quite motivated. And then they're suddenly excited. They're like, oh yeah, I'm excited to put this extra $5,000 into my retirement account. Goody. Like they're doing it all the time. Anytime you have extra money, this is what I was like, you sweep it away into your retirement account.
It's such a good feeling. I mean, it reminds me of when you were, 8 years old or whatever you were, and you were pasting the $5 bills into the photo album.
Yeah.
It's sort of the same basic concept. It's like it becomes a really powerful, just motivational process.
Yeah, it's like that.
Awesome.
An adult version.
Yeah. Well, the best things in life are things that are simple enough that kids can understand it anyway. Right?
Yeah, very true.
Well, I want to talk about the fear side of the equation. And in preparing for this, I read your most recent blog post, which I think you just posted a few days ago, which talks about the irrational fear that we have around money, and especially around this idea of retirement. You talked about the idea like you can reach retirement, but you have to accept retirement at some point, which I thought was really spot on because I run into that. I talk to people all the time about personal finance, and these fears, these irrational fears are the single biggest obstacle to achieving independence for most people. And I want to read a quote from your blog post. You said, people say you can never be too safe. That's hard to argue with, right? And you say, many people agree with this statement because how could you argue with such plain folksy wisdom? But this rule is incorrect. It is indeed impossible to be too safe because safety comes at a high cost, which is the price is your own life.
Yeah, except you mispronounced one. I said it is possible to be too safe.
Yes. Sorry. I misread. It is possible to be too safe. So that's counter to the knowledge that like people feel like you can never have too much in the bank. You can never have too much security. And you're calling BS on that.
Yeah. Because you're only going to live so long. And a lot of people, they'll have like the problem with one more year syndrome, which is what I was talking about in this article, is that you get through one more year and then you say one more year again, and it happens forever.
Right.
Because there's no such thing as infinite safety.
Yeah.
There are people who have tens of millions of dollars who are, you have to get increasingly bad at money to understand that you don't have enough or to not understand you have enough. But anyway, there are people who think they can't retire on that amount of money and they keep working. And some of the personal finance gurus, the big plasticky face ones that go on the news a lot, they push this thing. They're like, $10 million is peanuts. What if you get sick? Or what if you have, elder care, blah, blah, blah. Like they're just trying to scare this. And then this person, well, she has I've given a lot away, but anyway, she runs an advice channel and people will call in and like, hi, I'm like a professor and I have $2.5 million in the bank and I'm just so tired and I've worked 35 years. I'm 65 years old. Can I retire? And Susie Orman, this is who I'm talking about. She'd be like, just 10 more years. You really need to pad those retirement accounts because you don't know what can happen. And it's just like the worst advice I could imagine. And like this professor has like a pension. She has her millions of dollars of investments. Her children are grown up. Like the cost of keeping that job an extra day is way more than any financial security you're going to get.
And I am the poster child for that thinking. Unfortunately, when I discovered your stuff, as I said, I think I was probably, 43, 44. And I was like, holy cow, I already have enough. Why didn't anybody tell me this? And by the way, I'm surrounded by people who are worth tens of millions of dollars who don't feel like they have enough.
Yeah.
Right. And these are supposedly the smartest people in finance.
Yeah.
And so that was a huge, huge breakthrough for me. And I think in general, in everything we do, we tend to dramatically exaggerate in our minds the downside risk. Mm-hmm. And you made a really important point earlier, which I want to bring back up, which is it's not like, when you achieve financial independence, let's say you quit your soul crushing 9-to-5 job, it's not like you're locked into that forever. Like one of the things I remember, and I always repeat that you said, was that most people, we still need challenge. We still need work. Most people who quote unquote retire are going to earn some form of money. Even if you don't really intend to, you'll end up doing things that end up producing some level of income, which by the way, 25-1, take that annual amount of income that you'll continue to make, multiply that by 25, and you can reduce your amount needed by that much.
Yeah, it's very true. And there's so many tricks too. Like sometimes people will just like rent out the lower level of their house or like do some Airbnb and stuff. And that can drastically increase your post-retirement income. And a lot of tricks. And the people assume that you can't do until they start to hang around with people that do these things. And then it becomes normal.
Right.
And then now I hang around with mostly young, early retiree people. And some of them have side hustles.
Yep.
Some of them don't. It just really depends on a variety of like motivations and stuff.
Well, I was telling Johnny, our producer, on the way over here that I'm a rock climber. And so I spend a lot of time in that community. I meet a lot of, especially younger people. And your work has been incredibly influential in the climbing community. I just got back from a trip to Ten Sleep, Wyoming, which is this time of year in the hot heat of the summer. It's a really popular climbing destination, kind of in the middle of nowhere in Wyoming.
Yeah.
And there's hundreds and hundreds of climbers. And there's this whole subculture that exists where a lot of these folks, they're highly educated, they make good money, but a lot of them have either retired in their 30s or are working remotely part-time. But your name, Mr. Money Mustache, comes up a lot. They've adopted this lifestyle.
Oh, wow.
And it's en masse. And like the typical scenario is they're living in their van on a never-ending climbing road trip. Maybe they own a condo in Denver and they're renting that out while they're not in it.
Yeah.
They've got side hustles and they figured it out. They figured out that they don't have to buy into this like sort of, grind away in a cubicle until you're 65 and then retire. So it's catching on, I guess is kind of the point.
Maybe that's why we have the shortage of workers. Keep hearing that all the skilled workers.
Well,
can't find enough.
Nobody wants to work.
And the Great Resignation and stuff.
Yeah.
And maybe it's enough of this early retirement is spreading.
Well, as it should be, because then what that should drive, right, is like opportunities for people who are earlier on the curve or from other countries or, that's.
Yeah. And also companies should encourage work-life balance more often. And this is one of the things I like to push for. If you're starting a company or managing an existing one, you should think of your people as not just like things that you want to grind away and then spit them out when they're done. And this is one of the things I disagree with on the way how the company Tesla is run, because the CEO, Elon Musk, he only cares about work. Like he just works almost the entire time he's awake, which is 100 plus hours a week. And he thinks that's normal. He thinks that's what the employee should want. Otherwise, you don't care about the earth.
Right.
You don't care about Tesla's mission.
Yep.
So he pushes this on people. And then later I saw an interview with him where he was saying, the problem is all these people in Tesla, they get rich and then they quit. They retire early. Like, I wonder why, Elon. Number one is because the idea of financial independence is out there now. So people are smart enough to figure it out. But number two is, why would you do 100-hour a week, or even in my opinion, a 50-hour work week is too much? Why would you do that kind of work when you don't have to? However, if you do care about your engineering job and in Tesla's mission, if there was a place for like a nice 25-hour a week, come in when you want, remote work, you're still a genius. You can contribute great software.
Yep. Sometimes,
you should welcome that.
I think the world is headed that direction, whether we like it or go along kicking and screaming or whatever. I think ultimately what's happened, really the pandemic was like an inflection point for this, where remote work and this new sort of lifestyle oriented, it's not, living a great life and doing great work are not mutually exclusive.
Mm-hmm.
And, you talked about how like you have this innate sense as a young man that like, this is how money should be managed. If I was ahead of the curve on anything myself, it was on that like, I never understood this idea of like setting up a life that's not sustainable. For me, from day one, I love my work. I love everything I do right now. And I was pretty deliberate about setting up a life that I don't want to really, honestly, even a vacation from, or certainly don't want to retire from. And that's what you're talking about, is like this idea that you're wearing a badge of honor because you're working 100 hours a week. Guess what? That will come to an end. That's not sustainable.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm a big believer. There's like this sort of unspoken, assumption that, if you value lifestyle, you can't do great work. And I just completely reject that.
Yeah. And also I think we should allow ourselves to have different phases. I was a lot more, to be honest, I was smarter and more energetic through my 20s. And I enjoyed, I invested that in engineering. Like I chose not to have children early because I wanted to be a better engineer. And I was excited about the career. And I would get up early, work a long shift, bike home through the heat and all the way up to my house at the top of the hill. And then I would go to the gym at 9:30 at night and go to bed and then repeat it all over. Now, when I think about that, I'm like, I can't even imagine doing that because I'm twice the age. I'm 47 now. And so I extracted that superpower out of myself earlier, but I just didn't blow the proceeds, thankfully. So I was able to save those. And then there was my 30s, which is mostly like the child raising years. A little easier, but still pretty hard. Yeah. And then now the 40s is something else. And I would not be as good a software engineer now. Like I feel like my brain has slowed down and my focus level has slowed down. I mean, it's still enough to have a productive life and even make lots of money, but it's just a different stage. Just like a football player, you have to be a certain age range for that. So I encourage people, if you work on the money part earlier, then you have these options. You don't have to be the 47-year-old tired software developer pretending to still be smart while the 20-year-olds are running circles around you. Right. Because you did your job of
well, I think what you're pointing out is there are seasons to life, and to deny that is kind of absurd.
Yeah. Like prepare for it. And if a company could still, I could still contribute to some of these companies in a different role. Like now I'm good at motivating people and writing stuff.
Likewise.
Or understanding big picture technology and being like, no, that's a bad idea. No, that's a good idea. Like that kind of stuff I'm still good at. And some companies wouldn't want me to do that because I've been out of the workplace too long, or I don't want to work 50-hour work weeks.
We're aligned on that. I mean, I started a new company, a software startup, basically in January. And on one hand, I was like, what am I doing to myself? But on the other hand, I viewed it as an opportunity to be very deliberate about the role I create. And I can add a lot of value, a lot of expertise, a lot of wisdom that I've accumulated the hard way over many years. Yeah. And so what I've done is I've just been very deliberate about crafting that role so that I'm not creating a role that should be filled by a 20-something who's got just boundless energy, right? I can meter mine out and provide very, sort of sniper shot doses. My friend Dan, I told him I was going to be talking to you today, and he said, "Hey, ask that guy when he's going to write a book." And I don't want you to answer that question because I actually want to expand the question to be a little bit broader. Is that, my observation, having sort of indirectly followed you for many years, is that you're a bit of what I'd call a reluctant influencer. Your blog was wildly successful. You've got a huge following on all the social channels, but you haven't really actively sought to grow the brand, to cash in on the brand, to aggressively grow your following. You've just let it sort of happen organically. And I think I know sort of the why behind it, but why don't you talk a little bit about sort of that conflict there?
Yeah. Well, I don't want me to be like, I don't want it to be about me. So I'm not going to put like billboards on my face or like have books with like my big dumb face smiling on the front, like you can be a financially independent. I find that distasteful. And like, even like in the real estate market, I always thought it was ridiculous where a realtor will have his or her face, on the bench, the bus stop bench. I'm like, I don't want to see that. I want to see like numbers of your performance, or I want to see your philosophy. Why are you different? I don't care what your makeup face looks like or your special hair face. So anyway, I feel the same way about marketing. I mean, I do want my stuff to spread around as much as possible. So I do what I consider marketing as far as I'm willing to go. Like, for example, I have like a Mr. Money Mustache Facebook account and Instagram account, and I post stuff, little tidbits there to keep people engaged. But I want to be respectful too. I don't want to be one of those, like, you should check in every day. I'm going to post crap 5 times a day, so you're addicted to my feed. Or I'm going to put like, sexy dancing men and women, flexing so that you'll want to watch it more.
Yeah, you haven't done the growth hacks, which, I really respect. I mean, I'm a big believer, I've been a marketer my whole career. I'm a big believer in building brick by brick, because the 80-20 rule always applies anyways. Like, it's always like 20% of an audience or a customer base that generates 80% of the value. And why not focus on the 20% rather than trying to, have a bunch of people who are only, somewhat interested?
So there might be growth hacks that I don't know about. So I'll learn about those either now or later from you, because I'm pretty naive on promotion. And my main thing is I don't want it to be distasteful or disingenuous. I don't want to cash in. Like, I don't mind having my website make money from like affiliate, people sign up for a bank account or whatever.
Right.
But I don't want to exploit people like, hey, I have $1,000 course and it will change your life. And it's so cheap at only $1,000 or whatever.
Well, I think part of the brand, the magic behind the Mr. Money Mustache brand is that I think people sense that you're the real deal. Like, you don't just talk about these things and then do otherwise. You practice and have practiced what you preach for many, many years. And there probably are lots of opportunities. I mean, I was going to ask, like, surely over the years, you've had lots of opportunities, or people have come to you with a variety of opportunities to kind of cash in or ideas for growth. And my read was always that you're just like, you're protective of your time more than anything. I remember I met you a few years ago. I actually came out and visited you. At the time, I was working for a big financial services company, and I had an idea for doing a content collaboration. And your answer was basically a hard no. At that time, you said, look, I am raising my son. I'm super protective of that time. Any content, video type stuff I'm going to do is going to be with him. So is it really about time at the end of the day?
Yeah, like, I never want to sell any of my time for something that's to make money, first of all, because my time is worth more than just extra numbers in the bank account. But if it's something that's worthwhile, then I'll still do it. So then it just becomes like, is this really worthwhile? Like, going on interviews like the one we're doing right now, I think that's worthwhile, as long as it's like worth, it's for somebody, the interviewer has a mission somewhat aligned with what I think. So I'm not going to go on like Fox News podcast or whatever, that kind of stuff.
Right.
Or like, General Chevrolet pickup truck ads and that kind of stuff. But if it's things that are in line and it's going to reach new people, then that's my version of marketing. Like, I say yes to a lot of interviews, even though, to be honest, you have to answer the same questions that people have asked you every interview for the last 10 years.
Yep.
But that's my version of marketing. Like, I went on a long interview with the nice German newspaper earlier this week. And I'm like, I mean, I don't even know German, and it's going to get all botched in the translation, but it's still going to reach a lot of new people.
Sure.
And even though I won't get any personal benefit from it, I just it's my best attempt at I know there's a lot of people in Germany. If they get ideas about consuming less natural resources in order to improve their own lifestyle, then that's helping out. And that's good.
Honestly, I think, you're better off not being tainted by the whole world of growth hacking, because I think you'd lose some authenticity to your brand. And, what you've really built is this brand, right? And as I said, brick by brick, the word is spreading. Word will continue to spread. There will be sensible ways for you to, to make yourself known and to even make money where it makes sense off the brand. But it seems like you've done it the right way.
Good enough. I mean, if you look how much the FIRE movement is out there, more than I could ask for anyway. So that's good.
Yeah. Well, to that end, do you think about, where do I want to take this thing? Do you have sort of a big vision for what Mr. Money Mustache can be, or like your personal mission and like the scale you want to reach? Or is it just more of a I'll do these things that I care about and let the chips fall where they may?
Yeah, I think that's the second option is better. It's just day to day, try to have a good life, try to make good choices. I do try to keep the Mr. Money Mustache thing going, because I think it's a really valuable, like, how often, how many people get the option to just type something into the computer and it's going to reach hundreds of thousands or maybe even millions of people. Like, you don't want to just throw that away. So try to keep it going. And I think I don't have a specific goal, but I was thinking about this just recently.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, I've been doing this 11 years and it's still going, which is excellent. The best situation for me would be to just continue the rest of my life being sort of a background commentator, increasingly, respected if I don't sell out and I keep being honest about stuff that, like I'm not going to be like, Bitcoin, everybody buy my Bitcoin products because then like, temporary,
sure,
flood of cash maybe. And then like lifelong,
at the expense of your credibility. Right?
Yeah. So the model I think of is Warren Buffett. So he's been doing this for longer than almost anybody's even been alive. And he's more and more respected each year. Like, hey, what did Warren Buffett say? A big crash. What does he say about this? Inflation. Is he worried? He's like the grandfather of American finance. And his calls on stuff are very, very measured. Like he's either right or he'll say, I don't know enough to comment on this.
Right.
That's great.
What you just described is compounding, which is the name of this podcast.
Yeah.
And, compounding is just an amazing phenomenon because, it turns out if you just do the right things over and over, day after day, you end up creating something probably bigger than you ever imagined, no matter what your vision was for the future.
Yeah.
Just chopping the wood, doing the right things day after day, puts you in a better place anyway.
Yeah. I like that because it's powerful, but it's also easy.
Yeah.
Because you're not busting your back just to meet your growth targets this year or something short term.
Baby steps and compounding really is kind of the key to everything in life, whether it's health, fitness, business, wealth building, anything. Yeah. It's not glamorous, and I think Warren Buffett's approach to finance is probably not like, I think he would say like, we find great companies and we hold on to them forever.
Yeah.
That's not, what are we going to talk about? Like, where's the flashy headline?
Yeah.
It's not flashy. And most of compounding isn't.
Yeah. He just talks. I mean, he speaks rarely and wisely, and then he writes his one little 5-page summary at the end of each year. Like, here's the things we did. And, some of them might've been bad decisions. I'm not the smartest person in the world. Like he always says that kind of stuff. And he's like, we were surprised that we made an extra $41 billion.
That was nice.
To be honest, through dumb luck. And you should not expect that next year, but we'll continue to do the best for our shareholders.
Yeah. What happens year after year?
Yeah. And he's like, well, it's kind of irrational that we have over $1 trillion now, but we'll just safeguard, even if it's reduced by 80%, we will still consider ourselves successful. And then like year after year, I love that.
Yeah. Well, you said something similar recently. It was an online discussion where people were like sort of commenting, maybe it was about the 4% rule, challenging it. And you said something like, you guys keep debating the 4% rule, I'll keep being retired.
Yeah.
And that's so much truth. It's like, just doing the right things day after day, you can completely ignore the noise, right?
Mm-hmm. It's ridiculous.
It's powerful.
Oh man, I still get sucked in, even though I shouldn't. Like seeing a bunch of stock headlines.
I know.
And then it's just so many hundreds of articles every single day saying like, stock market could be poised for another 10% decline. Stock market poised for 25% up quickly. Like all these ridiculous forecasts that they just do not, they're saying it like they know, and they just absolutely don't know. It's such a waste of
getting dragged into the the hill I am willing to die on and fight a lot on is around homeownership. I just believe it's the best path of wealth available to most regular Americans. And I end up getting into these debates that just become wildly irrational. And, again, going back to doing the right things, there's a lot of power in just being right and practicing what's right consistently.
Yeah. It's pretty good. Yeah, I would agree with you. Homeownership, especially if you take into account the behavioral finance aspect of it, because someone buys a house and they're going to hold it for many years, hopefully, and they're not checking market fluctuations and like, oh no, it's crashing. I got to sell my house now because it's dropping in value. Right. So they can't sacrifice themselves. So that's one of the
I used reasons. An example of the behavioral thing, and it's for real. I worked at this big multi-billion-dollar public company, and I was on the executive team, and everybody on the team was earning 7-figure salaries. But we used to joke that the only way we saved money was through bonuses that came once a year because it was a forced savings vehicle. Yeah. Anything that wasn't forced, we would, even at a 7-figure salary, people would spend that money away. So the behavioral psychology is a hugely important part of many financial decisions. One more thing on just financial independence and that lifestyle, and then I want to move on to some other things. So talk about some of the less obvious, what I'll call happy side effects of financial independence and in the lifestyle, really, which is really what it's about, is enabling a lifestyle I remember one example that you mentioned in your writing years ago was just the simple benefit of like choosing when you have to go and go to public places like the DMV and wait in line.
Yeah.
If you can do it, on a Tuesday at 10 a.m., you're not going to wait in line versus trying to do it at rush hour when everybody's there. Are there other things that come to mind in terms of just the sort of kind of somewhat counterintuitive side effects that come from being financially independent?
I think it's dealing with hardships is a nice benefit. So when everyone has their life, running at when things are good, your life might seem pretty fine, even if you're busy with a job and kids and all this stuff. But then the problem is you don't have any margin for error when things go wrong, like a family member gets sick or, some other life emergency, or you get sick. Then the whole well-oiled machine of your career and family life that's too busy, it breaks. And then it's a huge catastrophe. Like people can lose their house or lose their job, or, family relationships can break. And when you're partially retired, then you can really scale back. You're like, oh, I'm not doing any work for the next month because my mom needs my help or something, or my children, or I'm sick. And, if you have mental health or physical health issues, even in yourself, you, instead of getting more and more ground down, like I'm anxious or anxiety or depression, and you have a stressful job, then it's just going to be like 10 times worse. Whereas if you're retired and then you start to run into some of these issues, you're like, I can research this and I can like read some books, do some, see any professionals that I need. There's plenty of time to do that, work on your health and fitness, and you have a lot more time to fix yourself.
Interesting.
And the same applies with fixing everything else in your life too.
Yeah.
So
one of the things that I've realized as I sort of embrace this lifestyle also is, as a parent, being able to be there when it matters. I talk a lot about, I work from home. I've worked from home for 5 years. And what I learned was a lot of my most meaningful interactions with my kids happen in what I call in-between moments. So it's not these big flashy, like, let's go do something together that takes hours.
Yeah.
Often it'll be like, I wrap up a call, I go to the kitchen, my daughter's in there, and we'll talk for 5 minutes. And we have a really meaningful 5-minute interaction.
Yeah.
And now multiply that by a couple times a day, 5 days a week, 7 days a week for years. It makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
In relationships as well.
Oh, so much. Yeah. I mean, I should have mentioned that in the previous answer, because really, if you're going to have children, I'm pretty hardcore on this issue, but I think you should just allow yourself to suck at your job, just write off 20-year period, 18 years. And for me, I was just completely quit the job and then invent new jobs for myself in the times like when your baby's taking a nap, or when your kid's at school, or now my kid's older, so he's at home working on his projects while I'm here talking to you.
Yeah.
But putting the parenting first instead of, most people have it second under their jobs, even though they don't acknowledge that is where it has come. It just lets you have a lot more moments and get a lot more out of the parenting experience. Not for everybody, but for me, that was, the only reason I was going to have kids, in my case, one child, is if I could make it my first priority. And it, has paid off so much. Like our relationship, my son, is just so magical. It's like, just really, really close, like no wall between us, and very snuggly, even though he's a young man now.
Yeah.
And not afraid of anything, judgment or anything like that.
It's amazing. I mean, it goes back to like sort of the cliche, how many people are on their deathbed saying, gosh, I wish I would have logged more hours in the office.
Yeah.
But many people on their deathbed probably wish they would have invested more time in their children or in other relationships.
Yeah.
And that's that regret minimalization framework that Jeff Bezos talked about that should really guide your decisions.
Yeah, that is a smart way to think about it. What am I going to do about this decision? What will I think about it when I'm 100 years old?
Yeah.
And
act accordingly today.
Yeah.
Awesome. So it's been when did you publish your first blog post?
It was April 2011.
Okay. So it's been a little over 10 years, a little over a decade.
A little over 11 years. Yeah.
Okay. Well, so you are, let's be precise. The math matters.
A year matters.
And so you retired, you started this blog. So you've been living this lifestyle now for, really most of your life. But
18 years ago, retired, 17 or 18.
Okay. Wow. So even longer. So how has your life evolved? Has anything changed in a significant way? How has your life evolved over time? Like, let's fast sort of like Mr. Money Mustache 2022. What does it look like? And is it any different than 2011?
Yeah. I mean, lots of personal growth.
Yeah.
Things I won't get into on a podcast.
Sure.
But, lots of incredible joys and highs and hardships and stuff.
Yeah.
I've had family members pass away and been able to deal with it, with thankfully having time to do it. And child raising is lots of ups and downs of hardship and growth.
Yep.
But so, and reading all these books, reading a lot of books on different subjects. As you run into a problem, you're like, I wonder if there's a book on that, or just general stuff, and getting older. And for me, I think have had the unfair advantage as well of having this community of like readers. So people will always I can just type my thoughts, and then all these people will write back like, hey, here's my thoughts on that. Or have you read this book? Or I'm a doctor that specializes in this area. Have you thought about this? So it's like really, I've been in an extended graduate degree in life, but also like all the other fields that I'm interested, like all the science and physics and nutrition and health stuff that I'm interested in. It's like just been this flood of constant learning. So I feel like I've already lived so many lives. Like if I were to die, like find myself on my deathbed tonight, I'd be like, whoa, what a journey that was. Like, man, I could not ask for any more. And then just like pass out and die. Like I already feel like I've lived. And I think a lot of that I owe to retiring early, because just so many more experience were possible when I wasn't in the routine of being in an office every day. So I think it slows down time and makes you feel like you're living longer because you can have more experiences. So,
that is absolutely amazing. And I bet there's not many people who could say that at age 47. If I were to kind of pass away for whatever reason tonight, that I would say I had an incredible run. I'm pretty satisfied.
Right. I mean, I still don't want that to happen, because I think my son would be pretty bummed, and other loved ones in my family and friends. But and I'm enjoying life a lot.
Same for me. I mean, I think I'm probably close to being at that point or feeling that way myself. But at the same time, it's day one for me. Like I feel like I'm just getting started, and the best is yet to come. And so
that's good. But it's ups and downs too. For me, like I'll feel like that in the morning after a strong cup of coffee and
after your cold plunge,
in perfect health. Yeah, take a cold plunge and everything. And then other times I will, if I'm tired and hot and, brain chemicals fluctuate and stuff. And so sometimes you're like, I'm just not super excited about doing anything else today. But one of the keys about getting older and having wisdom is to stop yourself and be like, you know what? That's because you're tired and there's like less dopamine circulating in your brain and all the other reasons that don't mean anything they don't reflect on your life at all. They just reflect on your current state. And you have the luxury as a retired person of, just take it easy, take a nap, make a salad, take a cold shower and relax. And then you have unlimited, every hour is a new hour, every day is a new day. And then sure enough, you'll feel fantastic and you're cranking out other amazing things right after that.
That's an amazing insight too. That's how I live my life. And I'm fortunate to be able to do that. And it was a huge frustration for me earlier in life when I was trying to live sort of the normal young person corporate existence. I was always wired differently. I've always been sort of a creatively minded person. My work was never linear. And so I didn't fit into the structures. And eventually I learned, even at a fairly young age, was like, okay, if I'm going to be my best self, I needed to just ignore the structures and work under structures that work for me. So I'm a huge believer in, like, when I don't find inspiration, I just switch gears. I'll go for a hike, go climbing, lay on the couch, have a snack, whatever. Don't force it. That's a huge, that's again, one of those side benefits we talked about of having the independence, the ability to do that. And it's actually, it sounds like, some might label that like, well, that sounds lazy, but it's actually the most effective way to be.
Yeah. And it's sometimes laziness is the most productive thing to do.
That's right.
Rather than burning out. Seriously. I mean, if you do just get off the couch, sometimes you will be motivated and to continue, in which case it was the right choice. But if you've done too much stuff, you might need a break. And if you might be sick without realizing it, you might be like fighting a virus, and a nap can help you heal faster. And being retired is part of that.
Well, what we've gotten at in these past few minutes is really the thing I wanted to dig into most, and we've done a good job of that, which is not just like financial independence as a way to be smart with your money and gain control of your time, but what are the real benefits and how do you build a great life around it? Because that's ultimately what we're striving for, right? I mean,
Yeah.
There's people who make a ton of money and retire, never have to worry about money again and are miserable. But I think, the key is like, as a means to what? What are you trying to build toward?
Yeah. Well, retirement won't solve your problems, but it will give you more time to work on your problems.
What you do with that time.
Yeah. And if your job is your problem, then retirement will solve that problem, thankfully. Yeah. And there's a fair number of people. My job was pretty good. So it didn't get me out of a bad situation to quit the job. It just gave me more time to work on what I wanted to do.
Right.
But there's a lot of people who really are more patient than me. And thus they have kept unpleasant jobs for years after year out of obligation or fear or lack of even knowing they had an option. And for those people, you really will feel better if you quit.
Well, I think about the people who have, do really hard work. So you're working with your hands, you're on a highway crew, whatever, logging 40 hours a week, commuting to work day after day, year for 30 years.
Yeah.
And this stuff, I think you pointed this out earlier, but I want to highlight it is, if you earn a really high income, it's, your options are great. All your options are great, right? You can save really fast. You're probably not, you've probably got an okay job. Like you probably find some fulfillment in it. But if you're on that margin, like you said, where, it's a fine line between being broke and, saving a little bit, these principles are even more important.
Yeah. Yeah. Like one restaurant change can make the difference between, payday lender, you're in debt every week versus you're not in debt and you're slowly getting a little bit more.
That's right.
Bank account every week. That's like one meal can make that difference.
It's inflection points, right? It's like the fine line between trajectory up or trajectory down, and compounding cuts both ways.
Yeah.
It can be nasty on the downside. All right. So let's talk a little bit about habits, because really a lot of the principles you talk about boil down to just establishing the right habits. And I know you have some interesting perspective on like how habits are formed and how you stick with things.
Yeah. And this is stuff I stumbled into, probably would only have learned it because of the free time enabled by retirement.
Yeah.
So I like to study myself like a laboratory animal, like instead of being a human, I think of myself as a human animal. Like I have all of these weird traits, evolved traits and strange behaviors that don't make sense.
Yeah.
And the more you understand that, the more you'll understand like why am I happy at stuff and other things make me unhappy, and how can I get the most out of this weird meat plus brain creature that I am. So habits is one of those. So I started reading these great books. One author I'm really fond of is David Eagleman. And he writes these brain books called like Live Wired and other things. And he points out like the really interesting detailed way of every time you repeat a behavior, your brain neurons are sticking together. It's like scratching a needle into a record that wants to be replayed over and over again. So be really careful about what you repeat. And because the more you repeat something, the more it becomes a habit. And if you can repeat good things, then suddenly you have good habits. Like we were talking before we started the camera about how all of us exercise pretty regularly. And for many years, like I have been regular weight trainer and stuff since I was maybe 14 years old. I never really stopped.
Right.
It's not like I get super giant from it, but I've never been out of shape. And because of that, I've never had an injury or a medical condition that needed medicine or anything like that. Just because I had this really simple habit of like, oh, I should probably exercise again. Like it just fires in my head. And I can't not do it because I would feel something is wrong. And if you think about this, like when it comes to spending or like alcohol and tobacco addiction, or sometimes even just having a job, like if you have a job, the same job for 10 or even 20 years, you're repeating the same behavior. Like I'm getting up, I'm having my coffee, getting in the car, driving to work, doing the thing, coming back. And then I have the weekend and I have vacation. And you just repeat this over and you're scratching deeper and deeper into the record. And then you get older and your brain has dug a deep channel for itself, and your brain doesn't rewire as easily once you're older. So it's even harder to get out of that habit. So then people are in the situation like, I don't know what I would do if I quit because I've had this thing for 20 years. And it's super dangerous. It's like just as bad as being a heroin addict because you've closed your mind to other possibilities. And that's really why I encourage people to think and be very mindful of what you repeat. And
interesting. You are what you repeat.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because we talked about fear earlier, and I'd never thought about fear maybe coming from these sort of ingrained tracks on the record. It's like, all I've ever known is getting up and going to work every day. I'm actually, pretty scared of not doing it.
Yeah. Yeah, we naturally fear the unknown, and some people more than others.
Right. So is a positive way to use that sort of, neuroscience that, look, if I want to form a new habit that's hard, then, just recognize the first 10 times are going to be really hard. Yeah. And the next 20 will be, and then eventually it's not so hard. I think we all have experienced this in our own ways, like anecdotally, but to be mindful of that seems like a powerful sort of trick.
Yeah, for sure. And there's other tricks. Like I would definitely advise reading like The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg, I think his name, maybe. And then there's also Atomic Habits by James Clear, a pretty similar book. Atomic Habits is newer. And anyway, the concept of this is the keystone habit. So if there's something you're already addicted to doing, like for me, I make coffee every morning. So I know I'm going to do that, but you can pair habits. So I'm like, oh, well, if I'm trying to do something new, like let's say practice the electric bass or something like that. I'm like, well, you're not allowed to have your coffee until you do at least a little bit of this thing that you would otherwise not have thought doing. Or even just like for someone who's trying to get more active, you have to do 25 push-ups before you can pour your coffee.
And then
powerful. You're never going to forget. And you could even put a sticker on your coffee machine. Like, did you do your 20 push-ups?
I see an opportunity here because all these books you reference, I've heard of all of them. They've been recommended to me multiple times, yet I haven't read them. What we need is the Mustachian summary. So maybe this is a whole new frontier for the blog. Seriously, this, because it's all related, right? The power of habits, this neuroplasticity, it all goes together.
Mm-hmm. So I do have a books page. It's a little it needs a little update, but I could certainly do that. Is that what you mean? Or
no, I meant like literally, like just as you did with the financial independence principles.
Yeah.
Like literally write a post that basically tells us what we need to know.
Yeah, right. The complete guide to your human body and brain.
I mean, this is powerful stuff.
Yeah, right. And it's another benefit of getting older. It takes a while to discover all this stuff and read it.
Yeah.
And it's typically not in college courses because it's a little bit newer than what has been incorporated into the curriculum. So the more you read about yourself, the better your advantages in having a good life, I think.
Yeah, it's like, I was just thinking, the saying, youth is wasted on the young.
Yeah.
I find myself often thinking, if I'd known this or had this wisdom when I was in my 20s, like you said, had the boundless energy.
Yeah. But early retirement certainly helps you stay young longer because you're not draining yourself down with stress and unhealthy habits and stuff.
Sure.
So.
All right, this has been amazing. I want to ask one final question. I just want to provide some real tactical steps for people who hear this stuff. They want to take a few baby steps forward. They maybe feel a little trapped. So let's say someone's in a what they feel is a bad financial situation. So they've got lots of debt, maybe student loans, some credit card debt. They have a soul-crushing job, dead-end job. They don't like their job. They're struggling to pay. They feel like they're struggling to pay bills, let alone save money. What are the first few steps someone can take to just kind of turn that corner? Someone it came to you sort of innately, but that's not how everybody is. And so what are some steps, some habits we can start to ingrain on the record player to move forward? Just the first few.
Yeah. Okay. Well, number one, in that situation, I would think it would be nice to find a friend. So if you have a friend that is good at money, seek them out. A lot of times we are too fearful to talk about money with our friends.
Right.
And I've run into that been surprised by it because I've always really super open with money. So if you're lucky enough to have anyone good with money, then you open the books for them. You're like, hey, what do you think? Here's my debts. What should I do? And then if you might be able to find a counselor. I know someone who's a counselor. We could put in your show notes if you want. That kind of is like very affordable to just look over your stuff and tell you. So those are the knowledge side. If you're not confident already, if you already have some understanding of money, then you just break it down, like make a spreadsheet listing your debts and your income and figure out where things are going. And then most important is add up your spending. Like take all of however you spend your money, credit cards or cash, add it up each month at a total and break it down into whatever categories you can think of, like gasoline, restaurants, other stuff like that. Because if you know what you're spending, that's a really, really big step up. Most people just spend money and then they run out and then they keep spending money once they have another paycheck or whatever. And they're not adding it up. So they don't know how much they're spending. They don't realize what could be cut. So that's your awareness. And then after that, you just start, realizing what you can cut. I always tell people to start with the car because Americans spend way too much. Like driving is so much more expensive than anybody thinks it is. It's really like a rich person's luxury, but everybody does it. So what that means is the rich people can afford driving and the less wealthy people are broke because they choose to drive so much. So what that might mean is, can I move closer to work, or can I drive less? Can I combine my errands? And if you have anything other than like an efficient car, get rid of it. If you have like a Dodge Durango or a pickup truck or anything, just like that should never, ever be driven on a paved road with one person in it. Like anything that's a truck, anything that's an SUV, it's making you broke unless you're super rich already. So like sell it, get like a Honda Fit or some other thing, Toyota Corolla, little hatchback. It's going to save you tens of thousands of dollars over like a 5-year period.
Just to interject there, a huge believer on the car thing, and the best car is the car you own, and even better if you use it minimally. I just read the other day that the average car payment in America is just reached a new peak of over $700 a month. Yeah. To your earlier point, that's the difference between basically financial independence that could happen very quickly and never happening.
Yeah. And I do take a little exception with that story because it's talking about most of those payments are for new cars, right? And they're not cars, they're trucks. Like the most American vehicles are trucks. The F-150 Ford is the most selling thing. That's not a car. Yeah. And nobody should have the F-150. Even if you're a workman like I am, you should have a van. Right. If you're a farmer, you should have a flatbed so you can like load with a crane and a loader. Like pickup trucks, they just shouldn't even exist. They're so stupid because they have this like little tiny cargo bed and they waste a lot of gas. It's like the worst of all possible worlds.
Agreed. So, the car is the number one obstacle to wealth building. That's I think a fact by the numbers. And I think to your point, knowing your numbers is the place to start, right? So like knowing and it doesn't have to be complicated. You don't need a fancy budgeting tool. It's a simple like napkin type calculation. Yeah. And then just having the discipline to start doing the right things. And then one thing you mentioned that doesn't get talked about enough is the aspect of community. Before we started recording, you were talking about, we're recording here at Mr. Money Mustache World Headquarters in Longmont, Colorado. And you've created this co-working space where like-minded people, work, and you have meetups and whatnot. Yeah. And you mentioned that, a lot of these concepts, which maybe sound fairly radical to sort of mainstream normal people, seem very normal in your community because you're surrounded by people who are of like mind.
Yeah, definitely. So find people who are do-it-yourselfers and, salt of the earth people who plant a garden and have an older car and don't try to show off their wealth. Maybe if you have people who socialize by having dinner parties instead of going out, to an expensive restaurant, those are your people. Like they're more fun and they'll save you a bunch of money. And your example is funny because we're here. If you're watching the video version of this podcast, you might see some stuff in the background. There's a lady showing up on a bicycle right now. There's a whole bunch of weight equipment out here. Yeah. It's a 24-hour-a-day gym with a lot of equipment that I made, actually, like, welded steel and everything. So it's tens of thousands of dollars stuff, but it costs almost nothing. Yep. And then the people who are members of this co-working space, most of them, to be honest, are pretty well off. It's like retirees or software developers.
Sort of self-selecting, right?
Yeah, but they still ride their bike here and they still trade. And people, instead of throwing stuff out when they're done with it, we have a little discussion group where one of the channels is called Buy Nothing. And someone's like, hey, does anyone want my old microwave oven or my cat scratching post? And then we trade back and forth a lot of stuff to avoid buying and destroying unnecessary things. Yeah. And that's like, this is a big asset, both in social life for us, but also, we don't really need to save money, but it does save us a lot of money by being less wasteful.
Yeah, well, just the importance of finding your tribe can't be overstated. And for me, I came into that through rock climbing. I started rock climbing. What I learned was I loved climbing. I loved the places it took me, but the best part of climbing was the community. And it taught me as a, sort of executive who had, crawled my way up the ladder, that the best things in life truly are free. The experiences, the relationships, and finding people of like mind is incredibly important. It's a life changer.
Yeah, it's probably a good note to end on, because really what it's all about, being a human, and the reason we really do anything is to have good friendships and relationships, with everybody that we care about. So
What more is there to be said?
Yeah. Opening up
Man.
space in your life for that should be really our primary purpose.
Thank you so much for doing this. As I said, you've had a huge impact on my life, and I was so excited to be able to sit down and talk to you. And hopefully, this will have an impact on many others. I mean, this is how we learn. We're learning through community right now.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Kevin.
All right.